Okay. So you read some of the grammar article. How did that go?
So not particularly well, in that it was pretty slow going in terms of reading it. But that was sort of in part I was splitting my attention as well, which was not ideal. So I did go through it all, and I tried to do as many sort of exercises as I could along the way, with either the examples that you use, and then the examples at the end of the first section.
Uh-huh.
And that was about where I got up to in terms of yeah. So the last thing that I've got in my answers sheet here, or my notes and answers, is the delicious cake with berries, which is right before part 2.
Okay. Did you have difficulty with some of the questions or content? If questions asked?
Um, so I had a little, I mean, some difficulty with some of it. Most of it was around remembering the terms. So it felt like a lot of it was an exercise in becoming familiar with, like, for example, how a participle changes into either an adverb or an adjective, depending on things, that sort of thing. I did note here that I get a bit stuck on, or I felt like this at the time. So this was, I set the phone on my desk, was the example there, and particularly because I kept sort of having to check the way that things like on work, which I think is participle.
On is a preposition.
Preposition, yep. Yeah, no, I didn't actually end up doing any exercises with participles, I think, looking at it now. Yeah, so preposition. I did sort of get reasonably quick with that by the end. But yeah, but I feel like a lot of it's yeah, a matter of practice.
Okay. Your screen is low resolution. Is this one monitor or are you streaming like multiple things?
No, it's just one. So yeah, so I find Discord's not that great. If you like, it won't take me long to set up a YouTube stream that I can send you a link to, and that'll be a lot better.
Okay. There are quality options in Discord. Because you have Nitro, I think you can raise the quality. I don't know how much it'll help though.
Yeah, it's a high resolution monitor, so that I'm not sure if Discord actually supports particularly good streaming for anything over 1080p.
Yeah, I don't know. When I tried to stream with Discord, it picked up my desktop with no windows. Just the background
That's
picture. So I gave up.
oh, did you I feel like it might be possible to select like if you select Finder as the app, then it might not show you the windows, because it sounds like what happens when you select a single window.
No, I selected the screen, like the display, rather than a app.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, that's odd. I know about problems on Linux, but so the with regards to the stream, there's gonna be some black bars around it, but that's, other than that, it should be fine.
Okay. Grammar has too many terms. They're not like allergic to them, they aren't trying to minimize them enough.
Yeah, so
But
when you were, oh, yep.
I tried to use a reasonably minimal set of them and not use all the terms in my article. It was
Yeah, so
more.
I think I noticed that, like, determinant, for example, usually we just talk about that as a modifier. I think.
Yeah.
Because it does occur to me that it seems like a bit of a useless term in the scheme of things. What you were saying before in the channel about like principled or the lack of principles, that definitely sort of feels like the case in terms of, I guess it's sort of hard with English because it's arbitrary in many ways.
Yeah, determiner is a useful word if you're trying to go into a certain level of detail. Like, it's a category that, for some purposes, is worth giving a separate name to. But for many purposes, you don't need to distinguish different types of modifiers.
Yep. Okay, there should be a link in the channel now. I can zoom in on part of the screen as well, if that will help. It'll make parts of it a bit bigger at least.
Okay, so what's this drawing here?
So this is a diagram of so John put the toy soldier in the compartment in the box on the shelf in his room. So the
Okay.
green comments there, sort of on the particularly on, like, it occurs to me that in the compartment on the box or in the box on the shelf in his room is, you can sort of break that up in many ways. I think we had an example like that yesterday, but this is not all of them make sense. As in,
Yeah.
so I chose the first in as sort of the root uh, preposition, and
Yeah.
I've labeled them.
So,
I've labeled it incorrectly there, but yeah.
yeah, I think that the soldier is in the compartment, and then the compartment is what's in the box, and the box
Yep.
is what's on the shelf, and then the shelf is what's in the room.
Yeah, it's like you could say that, John put the toy soldier in the compartment in the box on the shelf in his room, in the sense that he was on the shelf, but that is yeah, a bit silly. Do you know if there's an easy way to zoom in on the document in Google Docs? Or maybe it's just that I don't have the window big enough.
I don't know, I
Uh,
don't use Google Docs much.
oh, here we
Okay,
go.
good. I know Just was very, very confused by this sentence, and he was putting all the prepositional phrases in reverse order.
Okay, yep. I wasn't certain necessarily about the well, I guess it makes more sense when you think of them as modifiers, just in terms of the way they hang off, but I think I've got that fine.
Okay, do you have any more trees that you made?
Yep. Just in regards to the stream quality, by the way, if it's not quite good enough, I can bump
No,
the.
it's fine.
Okay. So the in terms of for most of them, I didn't bother making an actual tree diagram. I just wrote out the S expressions, or the equivalent of,
Okay.
just because I figured that they were equivalent.
Yeah.
It's much quicker. So I think I felt like all of these were fine. I tried to identify them as well. So, like, on the desk here is acting as an adjective, because the preposition acting on the noun. So yeah, so when a
Right.
preposition acts on a noun, it turns into an adjective as opposed to an adverb in the other cases. So that was I think particularly the thing that I had some trouble with. The are my comments showing up? I might have accidentally resolved one of the comments.
Oh, I had the stream pause. Wait, what? Oh, that was next video. I just wanted to go to present.
Okay, so it seems like there might be a if you click on the little live, like the red live dot, that usually takes you to the front. It seems like there's a bit of lag. I'm not sure if there's browser support necessary for that, but yeah.
This is Chrome, but it doesn't click anyways.
I think I did send you a link to the doc as well if you wanted to open it on your end. But
I did not see the link.
it's in tutorial or tutoring. Sorry.
Oh,
I
I was
did it.
looking
Oh,
at the DMs.
sorry, that was the
I
I'll
don't.
just paste the link.
Yeah, I just see the stream. Okay.
So I wrote out a bit of a plan at the beginning as well, which I didn't actually end up evaluating myself against. I didn't make it to part 3 though, only to part 2.
That's fine. These words being cut off?
Yeah, they got the end of them got cut off. I'm not sure exactly why. I haven't had that problem before, but it might be just to do with the number of like it's a fairly highly branching tree by comparison to most of the ones I've played with.
Okay, yeah. So fell. The cake fell. And there's a bunch of modifiers.
Yep.
So I would put cake as the first child to indicate that it's the subject. If you don't want to do it that way, I would put a subject label on it.
I think I
that
did.
helps.
I think I did intend to do that, but I was using a library mermaid to generate this, and sometimes it decides to change the order of things. Usually, you can sort of coerce it to do things in certain orders, but it doesn't respect it.
Oh,
It'll
I
try
see.
and
Because it fits
lay
better
it out.
this way.
Yeah.
Alright, so it's the cake, it's delicious cake, and it was with berries. The falling was onto the floor, and the falling was from the table. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yep. So that one was the general strategy that I went with. I sort of left the working in, but on the top or the page previous, you can see the delicious cake with berries has square brackets. So I was using those to group things.
Yep.
And then I've got underneath like fell unfortunately, etc. That's the tree, and so you can see I put cake there. I put unfortunately first just to get it out of the way, and then
Right.
underneath that. Yep.
Yeah, I see. So you're learning the parts of speech. But you're calling prepositions participles, I think?
Yes. So that was a yeah. So I've done that in the diagram above it as well. I actually above that I think I'm fine because John Thought Hard About Chemistry has prep about.
Right, okay.
So I think it might have been yeah, confused myself going into that diagram.
Yeah, the names just take a bit of practice and you get used to most of them.
Yep. The first thing I tried to do actually was to recall all of the names from without prompting, just to try and solidify that. That's my sort of general strategy that I should do at the end as well. So I've got a little bit of color coding to those things, by the way. The idea is that the orange ones, the darker the orange, the less certain I am, and then the green ones are just general questions. So
Okay.
I've actually I've answered this one here with yes. So I came back later to do that. I think I can answer these now as well. In that like A and V are modifiers. Except A's an adjective in some cases. Where was?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terminology issue, but you can say an adjective is anything that modifies a noun. The type of adjective.
Okay, that makes it, yeah, simpler. So yeah, the jumped example we were talking about, I was so I was thinking that at the time. I didn't end up actually posting that because you were talking to Anne, I think. But when you yeah, you said that jumped is a noun in getting jumped, and I wasn't sure if you actually meant that it was a noun in the phrase above it as well, or which I think was I used jump as a replacement for hit, and it was
My
my
car
car
got
got hit.
right. If it was my car got jumped, then jump is playing a noun role as the object of got or complement.
Oh, as in because that's okay. No, the yeah, okay.
This is there's multiple ways people look at it. So, did you read the stuff I was saying with Anne?
Um, I got through about I think half of it.
Okay, so the standard view is that there are auxiliary verbs, and you put together several verbs, and you get an overall meaning of a verb. So you can use verbs to modify other verbs,
Yep.
and this is how you
This is the
create
quickly
some
jumped.
tenses and stuff.
No, quickly jumped is adjective verb.
Adverb, verb.
Yep. So you can use it to create tenses. Do you have an example?
Yeah. So in John had been playing golf, people will see had been playing as three different verbs that work together.
Okay, yep. Um,
The main verb in some sense is playing because that is the action involved. In terms of the content, it is the primary thing. There's a playing action that we're talking about.
yep. The way that I often think about this is what you could sort of take out and have something that roughly makes sense. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't sort of translate, but it doesn't work exactly. But if you take out playing, then John had been golf type thing. You lose much more context. It feels like by taking out playing. Um,
Yeah, playing is more important to the meaning of the sentence than the other verbs. However, grammatically, the most important verb there is had, and in dependency trees, they normally will put had as the root of the sentence.
because it determines tense.
No, because had is it's called a finite verb. It is a verb, it's actually the action in the sentence. Playing is not an action. Playing is the concept of playing. It is a noun role here. Because it is a thing. Playing is like an activity.
So had is the root verb or the main verb because we're describing a state that John was in, which was playing.
Yes, so John is the subject of the sentence, and had is the verb that has John as the subject. Like these two go together.
Yep.
So from a grammatical perspective, John is not the subject of playing or of been. John had something.
Yep. Playing doesn't. I mean, if playing is acting as a noun there, then it doesn't have a subject or anything. Then it's is playing golf an
Yeah, so
object? Is that the object?
playing does have an object.
Okay.
And
Oh yeah, yep. It doesn't have a subject though. Or
You
does it?
could read it as an implied John as the subject of playing, but it doesn't have an explicit subject at least.
Yep.
So playing is in a mixed state where it is partly acting like a verb and partly not. And it's the same thing with been, whereas had is only acting like a verb. It's doing the regular verb job.
Yeah, its role is more particular, in the sense that it can't fill any. There's no ambiguity in that role as opposed to the other. Well, I guess not necessarily ambiguity in the playing role, but I think I understand.
Yeah, so there's many different ways to use actions in a sentence. You can use them as like the concept of the action. You can use them as a modifier sometimes to give more information about something else. And you can use them as the action actually happening. So we use verbs in various different forms for different purposes. And had is the one that's doing the standard verb role. And people often sort of they just fudge it and say, oh, there's three verbs, and they work together, and these two support the other one. But I think if you're looking at it more strictly, then
Yeah, I
these
mean,
two
no
are
one.
only partially playing the verb role, and they're also doing something else.
Yeah, so no one like says the sentence meaning or trying to use like when people say that sentence, the meaning that they're intending is clear. So I sort of I mean that feels like the reason that we should treat it more strictly, because the meaning is more strict than it can be. Like it potentially can be interpreted more generally than the strictest meaning. I'm not actually sure how you would necessarily interpret it more generally, but that feels like the consequence
Well, so
from.
there's different ways you can tree diagram it. So this is the proper way.
Yep. So that's what I'd written down just now. It
And
doesn't
then
feel like it'd be possible to interpret it too many other ways.
this is the way a lot of people think of it. So here, both had and been are treated as essentially modifiers to playing that give it its tense and stuff.
Um, yeah, I mean that seems the least intuitive way to me. Uh,
This
it
is
seems like that has the least
roughly
meaning.
what's normally taught is more like
Uh,
this one.
so it makes more sense if it was like John plays golf. Um,
In John plays
because
golf, plays is actually the finite verb, so it is grammatically the root.
but yeah, the more I think about it, the more it becomes obvious that playing is like modifying golf, as opposed to. Oh, actually, sorry, I had it. I had the thing the other way around, where I had been golf playing, not been playing golf in the tree, and that doesn't make as much sense because you couldn't say, for example, John had been golf, but you can say John had been playing and sort of leave it at that.
The relation between playing and golf is pretty clear because golf is the object of the playing action. It's the thing that gets played, it receives the verb.
Yep. So um, playing is not uh, the I'm just trying to find that. That's not one of the participles or the was it participles that we covered at the end of last time? The gerund.
Yeah, it is. So the things called verbals are non-finite verbs. like these, like been and playing. So playing is either a gerund or a participle. These aren't infinitives.
Yes, yep. Yep. So I think it takes me a little bit to remember infinitive, but I think I get the idea of them reasonably well.
Infinitives
The
are the
others,
ones that have to in front of them, except not always. But like to be or to eat.
yep. It's yeah, I feel like it's quite easy to see the connection there in terms of um, the way they sort of was losing a subject. Um,
Yeah, the subject thing is interesting because sometimes there's no subject and it's like the concept of playing in general. But in this particular sentence, I think that John is an implied subject of Ben and playing. Like the playing we're talking about does involve John. Like we're only conceptualizing it to John's playing.
yeah, it feels like an inverse relationship in that, like the main thing that's going on is John had been playing, which implies that the playing was being done by John, um, as such. But it's yeah, but it's not what the sentence is trying to say. It's just the consequence of it.
I'm not sure what you mean. I think the sentence is trying to say that John was playing golf and that was an action completed in the past.
Yeah. So what I meant was like if we changed it so that the subject was the playing and the object was John, then we could say something like playing was being done by John, or something like that. Um,
Uh-huh.
and that's sort of what I meant by the inverse is I'm not quite sure if there's a word for that transformation. Um, but yeah.
Like playing had been done by John.
I'm not actually sure if that falls out because that's it's more complex with the done in there. But been done by John um
How did you have it?
feels like a phrase. I think it was that. It was like playing had been done by John. Um
Yeah, these kind of constructions are awkward. Also, in this version, playing is now the subject, which helps show that it is not acting like the verb very much.
oh yeah, so if you can rephrase the sentence and sort of turn it around like this, then it makes it yeah, so it makes it more obvious. So if you can rephrase it, then it's likely that the um whatever's in the place of playing is um yeah, it's an acting as a noun in this case, right?
Yeah,
Playing golf. Yeah.
essentially.
Um, had been done is a collection of three verbs as well,
Yep,
right? Yeah.
it is the same sort of issue. Again, had is the grammatically primary verb, but done is the action that we think of as the main action of the sentence in terms of content.
Yes, yep. So I don't think is, or rather, like the word by is not, or I'm not sure if it's particularly explained in grammar. I didn't see it.
Another thing about this sentence, although playing golf is the subject, John is not the object. So it's not quite right as a flip around. Because John is now a prepositional object, and we have the phrase by John, which we're using as a modifier. So John isn't the object of the verbs.
By John is acting as an adjective on done. Is that right?
Adverb.
Adverb. Oh yeah, because done's a verb. Yep.
Well, it's a modifier anyways. Because done is playing like a mixed role.
As in it's describing both the
Well, it's partly
there's
acting like a verb and partly like a noun.
Yep.
So a modifier for it is harder to classify, but it's not important to classify it, as long as you understand the connections.
Yeah. I think one of the things that led me a bit astray, just thinking about it now, was treating the words a bit too much like functions. As in, we used the analogy a little bit yesterday, and I think particularly that was where I got caught up with prepositions, because they don't, like, they sort of act. They're not a function because they're like what they're acting on is a result of their, like, the other inputs as such. And so I think that was part of the reason that I had trouble with it at the beginning.
I don't think I understood that very well. So I see a preposition as a function of a noun which outputs a modifier.
I think so. Yeah. So the thing that I've got here in my docs on the bottom of page 2. So the way that I thought about it, and I mean, yeah, I wrote far more for that than any other sort of section. But the what it's relating to that second sort of parameter in my thing. So, you know, with shoes, as an example, depending on what you put in that second spot, what it's relating to, so like socks with shoes, is different from, or then that will act as an adjective. Does it, socks with shoes?
Right. So I just said it outputs a modifier so that I didn't commit myself, because yes, sometimes it's going to be an adjective, sometimes it's an adverb,
Oh,
depending
okay,
on what
yeah.
it's modifying.
Yeah, so of course, because a modifier takes, so if you just put the parentheses like that around it, then that makes a lot more sense, because a modifier itself is a function.
Okay, so verbals are some of the hardest stuff anyways, so I would try not to get too stuck on them at the moment. If you focus on getting everything else clear before worrying about the details of verbals, I think it'll be easier.
Yep.
Prepositions are easier than verbals. They follow a standard pattern. Pretty
Yeah, I feel like
consistently.
I got to grips with them much more quick. Like, there was the language or the remembering exactly how they worked and what it meant. But once I got past that, it was much easier to work with them in terms of the exercises.
So you're asking if to sit was a verb phrase? Is that the question here?
Yeah, I think that was so yeah, I'm pretty sure that was exactly what that meant.
Okay, whether you consider it a single word or a phrase is not important. You can go either way.
Yeah, I mean, as in it acts as a verb regardless of whether it's a single word or a phrase.
Yeah, and then also to sit is a infinitive. It's a non-finite verb. It's not going to play the standard verb role in a sentence.
Yes, yeah, as in it's never the main verb. I think I might have had that written down somewhere. Yeah.
So the role it will play in the sentence might be a noun phrase role rather than a verb role.
How would to sit act as a noun?
I like to sit.
Okay,
In
yep.
that case, it's the object of liking. And it refers to the concept. Basically, it's similar to sitting.
Was there I wonder, I think I might have felt like that was ambiguous because there wasn't I'm not sure if there was a clear like output from that, but I guess that's part of the difficulties of verbals.
Yeah, so infinitives play multiple roles. Participles also can be nouns, but that's less common. When used in a list, is it still a conjunction? Do you mean a word like and?
Yep.
Yes, that is a conjunction. It still has the same name even though it's doing something different. It's still joining things together. But yeah, the difference between joining clauses and joining phrases is pretty important.
Yeah, that was why it was why I wrote the question, because it seemed an entirely different function. Or a different purpose. But then we sort of use the same thing. But I feel like there's not really much else that conjunctions in lists would really be used for. So because we use the same word, we just gave them the same name and moved on.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the things that's notable about those is subordinating conjunctions only work for clauses. The ones we use for joining phrases are just the coordinating conjunctions.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I can't say like to join a list. I can only use like and. But is one of those other one of the like a conjunction like but is not a coordinating a subordinating conjunction. It's a coordinating conjunction.
Yeah. So there's an acronym fanboys that helps. The coordinating conjunctions are for and nor, but or yet so. There's not that many of them.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of lists can't take all of them though. I imagine those
You can use most of them with
I'm trying
phrases.
to do
I,
things like oh sorry, go on.
yeah, I looked into this a while ago and came up with examples that were less common. Because usually it's going to be like and or, but you can use some of the other ones sometimes. I think there might be an FI post about it, but I'm not sure.
I was just thinking of I feel like there's some words that get used to join lists that aren't conjunctions. And I'm just trying to think of an example, but the thoughts sort of escaped me.
Also, there's a difference between being able to make a list of 3 or more things versus just joining 2 phrases.
Yes, yep.
Yeah, so if you specifically want a list, it's going to narrow it down further. For lists, it might just be and, nor, or.
Yeah, I think that's I can't see how you can use but to join lists. Yet and for make sense, but they have causal implications. It feels like. And so they sort of only work between two.
Yeah, I think that's right. They don't work well for 3 plus.
If you think about he went to the shops for his fridge was empty or something like that. There's much more of a relationship there than using and, but, or.
Yeah. Yeah, for and yet are less neutral, and so. So, by the way, is also a subordinating conjunction. It can be either one, depending on the usage.
Okay.
Which is another minor detail that makes things a little bit harder. Okay, yeah, an adverb can modify an adverb like very quickly ran.
Yeah, so I think too freely was my
He drank too
was my
freely. Yeah.
I was playing with like two as in also to try and get a bit of a sense for how it worked as an adverb because it didn't that didn't make sense to me immediately. I've actually got a diagram just up there that well, it's not very big. But if I do that, it'll.
Max drank too much. Oh, okay, so there's an issue with this.
I think is too and much. They're the wrong way around. So I think I see adverbs as taking the adjective, or as in because it's I mean it breaks the rule about modifiers that we went by before though. In terms of if two is modifying or two joins onto much to create a modifier.
Yeah.
If we when we had like the before, the is the part that hangs off the end.
Yeah, so
So this
2 is telling us how much. So 2 should be a child of much. So this is definitely incorrect. So that's one of the clues. And then the other clue is if you just swap it like that, drank is an action verb, and action verbs for objects only take nouns, not adjectives. And they can only be modified by adverbs, not adjectives. So an adjective cannot be the child of an action verb because there's no way for it to modify it.
Okay, yep. So my oh, that's not working. I'm just trying to there we go. So the part that I've just put in a square there, that ends up acting as an adverb in like on drank. Is that
So what you want to do here is look up much and see what parts of speech it can be, and then try to figure out which ones make sense. There's actually 2 options here. Much can be a pronoun, so it's going to play a noun role, in which case it would be the object of drank. And with that usage, it would mean a great amount or quantity. So it would be Max drank a great amount or quantity. And then the 2 doesn't quite make sense.
yeah, no, I mean looking at it, I mean much is not even an adjective, according to whatever Google's giving me.
Yep.
It's a adverb and determiner.
Yeah, well, a determiner is like an adjective, it goes with nouns. So the other
Oh, okay,
option
yep.
here is we find adverb to a great extent, a great deal. So Max drank to a great extent, and then to as an intensifier for a great extent, like to a too great extent, or to a very great extent. The two can fit in there and modify the meaning. So I think much is an adverb.
So the two, we're talking about the TOO in the diagram. They're not the two in the example. No, no, you.
Yeah, the diagram here.
So if much is an adverb and to is an adverb,
Uh-huh.
how do they work together? Or they don't actually work together like this at all.
So
Or
if much is an adverb, then it is modifying drank, and then the to is just tacked on as an extra modifier to modify how much. And they're not particularly grouped. It's just like red car, where you can group them and say red car is the noun phrase, but the red is kind of secondary, and the car is playing the primary role.
yep. So this is the right hierarchy then. I've got the labels wrong though.
Yeah, so I'm also looking up to check, and it has to only as an adverb. So if much was in its noun role, then to would not work well.
Yes, yep.
This is saying that the word to should not be used to modify a noun.
Yeah, no, to feels like an accelerant almost, or an amplifier, as it only works to increase an effect as opposed to yeah, so it can only work on modifiers.
Yeah, I think that's how it works.
I mean, you could have
In fact, it says right here as submodifier. They're saying you
oh yeah,
use
there we
it
go.
on other modifiers. So the
That makes
tildes mean strike through.
yes, yeah.
Okay, got it.
It's yeah, the only way I know how to really uh do it in text, and some markdown works like that.
Okay, I think we got through the question.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
there's this one. I didn't see this yet.
Um,
Oh, this is the same subject we were talking about earlier, though.
yep, there are a few of those that I anytime I was sort of feeling like I didn't understand something, I would try and play with an idea um, and guess and then try and validate it against
Yeah,
yeah,
so
to
with
find
stuff like this, if you want to go into more detail on it, and it's not a top priority, but you can start Googling stuff like what is a participle. And
yeah, I didn't quite go that far, but I did Google examples of various things. I found actually Google Images is sort of good for not giving away spoilers about the definition, and just giving you examples.
right, Wikipedia actually tends to be pretty good for this kind of thing. And there are a lot of sort of school-like sites that are teaching grammar, like Grammar Bites or whatever, that give you like short lessons on it. And the quality is variable, but if you look through a few, you can usually get the general idea.
Yeah, I did when we were I mean I think they're called parsing trees technically. Um, but I did search for those the other day, and yeah, the stuff on the resources I found were pretty inconsistent. But that I imagine is because it's a more advanced topic. there was a lot of linguistics stuff actually, like computational linguistics.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to go further with grammar now or switch over to overreaching?
I feel like so in terms of um, going forward in grammar, I can probably like make a bit of progress with the article before we need to like come back to it.
Okay.
Overreaching though, I think one of the reasons that I didn't do as much as I intended to on the grammar article plus the like various exercises, including I think I actually started gathering, or I was gathering, I can't remember where, examples, either that from my own speech, or where I'd like written various things. I wonder if
Were you noticing that you use grammar that you don't know how it works? Was it that kind of issue?
I would so my intuition's always been that I like have it. Well, sorry, I felt like I've had a good intuition for grammar, but not been able to explain stuff. And I think the way it usually comes out is the like inconsistency. So the example that I'm thinking of, which I'm not exactly sure where I recorded, was I ended up writing something as part of the document where I switched I think I switched tense. So I said essentially the same thing twice. And the second time that I said it, I swapped the way that it worked. I know that. I've been switching around documents or where I've been writing, which has been part of the problem, but I'm going to stick with Google Docs from now on.
Yeah, studying it and learning actual principles of how it works can help with consistency. When it's intuition, you pick that up a lot from reading and from talking with people, especially in childhood. And first of all, people aren't completely consistent about how they talk. And second of all, when you're trying to create an understanding of English and grammar as a child, it's hard to organize everything into clear, consistent principles, especially because there actually are special exceptions in English. So what happens is you end up with a non-ideal organization because you don't know a lot about organizing complex things when you're 3, and you end up putting things into your head in a way that mostly usually works, but it's not as organized as it could be.
Yeah, that's definitely yeah, definitely what I felt. It's hard to notice the actual deficiencies until I've started doing this sort of thing. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure where that I might have accidentally deleted it.
One of the ones people notice the most is that they're unsure about where commas go. That's an experience I had too.
I feel like I'm prone to comma soup, where I have these long run on ideas that I get to the end and then realize I need to break it up, sort of thing. But one thing I haven't practiced, but I've been meaning to since the other day was sentence scope. I guess is maybe this is I guess sort of like a thing common with overreaching in general. My intuition for my knowledge is higher than my explicit knowledge actually is, and I don't have, because I might have plenty of implicit knowledge, but like rules of thumb, that doesn't necessarily. I don't know when that's going to help and when it's not, and so I can get lucky and feel like I handle things really well until, I don't, and I don't have a reason why at that point because I don't have the explicit knowledge. That seems to interact because it makes sense that if I was trying to put implicit knowledge into words, then it's going to be less organized because I'm essentially trying to make it up as I go along each time, as opposed to having good sort of foundations or reasons or first principles to be able to express it. Yeah.
Yeah, implicit knowledge tends to be harder to error correct, and a lot of the corrections are band-aids on top of it because it's hard to reorganize the foundations and do like a proper refactoring.
I think that's probably a good sort of description of why I've had trouble writing clearly for a long time. I think probably because there was, like, when I was in a educational sense, there was sort of a limit of complexity that I didn't have to go beyond, and I was interested in other things that were more complex, and then trying to write about them meant that I didn't have any sort of foundation to build on, and so the result is just sort of confusing. I've definitely done better when I put more structure into things, though. But I haven't had too much time to practice trying to, like, idea trees are the thing that I've been trying to play with to, as a tool to break down ideas. So I've managed to make a few of them that are, more than just trivial. But I guess I don't know how to validate whether I'm right or not a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, so idea trees are just a tool or medium, and you can use a tree in many, many different ways. So using the tree format, it helps some. It has some value in and of itself. It's a good format. But you also have to have subject-specific ideas of how to deal with it and what sort of processes to use. There's things outside the tree structure itself that go into making it work well.
Yeah, so I was watching your video where you were putting, like, where you were constructing I think it was the idea tree about idea trees. I was going through that at the time, and I definitely felt like, my idea of where to break things down and into what sizes, I think, is inconsistent. And so sometimes I would have, even the trivial one that I put in idea trees the other day is sort of notably inconsistent in that everything is one or two words besides this one big thing in the middle. I'm not actually sure if that is bad or not, but
It's usually bad, but not necessarily. It partly depends on your goal. So this is similar to the run-on sentences in the soup, where if your goal is brainstorming and exploration, then those things are okay. You just want to get words out, get ideas out. Don't restrict yourself too much, just let stuff flow. And so having an idea tree that's a bit disorganized fits that style, where your purpose is to turn a bunch of thoughts into words. And then you can either leave it that way because it's just notes to yourself or it was practice or whatever. Or if you want to make a more presentable document, you can go back through with a more structured process. So it fits with the common way of splitting up the brainstorming phase from the criticism phase or the other things you do, like once you have the ideas out, to refine them. Brainstorming is where you are more free-form and loose and creative and a lot more open to bad ideas and not worrying about if there are problems with them. And then you can go back through as a second phase and look at it more critically and organize it more. And, like, splitting those up helps people not hamper their creativity.
Yeah, so that was when you were doing the idea tree. I remember one of the, or maybe it was just written in the thing. The first step is pick an empty node, or first or second, pick an empty node, and then write down everything that you can about that, because you can always come back and add stuff later or prune it as necessary. But you want to sort of explore as vastly as possible. So it does make a lot of sense in terms of splitting them up, sort of maximize your creative output, and then go through with a fine tooth comb after that.
Yeah, so once you have a list of things, you can start to put them into categories, or you can decide some are more important than others and which are the most essential things and get rid of the rest. You can make choices like that. Yeah, like pruning or organizing them.
Yeah, that
And it depends on your goal. Like, do you need a small output? Then you're going to have to prune a bunch and just pick the most important things. But then for a different project, maybe it's okay to have a very large document.
yeah, um, yeah.
And one of the ways you can organize them is by what conceptual level they're on, like what level of detail. And when you have a tree where most of the nodes are 2 words and then some of them are like 3 sentences, then that indicates there's probably a jump in level of detail where you're going from broad summary concepts and then one of their children is just a bunch of details, which means that there are some intermediate stages in between that got left out that would help bridge the gap from high level to low level.
Is it worth looking at my little self-referential example?
Sure.
So I'll bring it up on. I'll see if I bring it up on my screen, I can probably zoom in on it. So this was, as I was sort of realizing, like the extent of my tendency to overestimate my own capacity and ability. This was sort of the thing that sort of came out as an idea, because it was only through like almost like deliberately trying to do too much that it became clear like how debilitating it could be. And so this is essentially, I mean, the how to see could just be the title of the thing, essentially.
Okay, I remember this. I saw this before. So, yeah, this has consistency issues. So, as an initial brainstorming, it's okay if you're just trying to get some thoughts down. But then, one of the ways you can review it is to consider what each of the parent-child relationships means. For example, is it a whole versus parts relationship? Or something else like causal?
Yeah, okay, so um,
So for example, with overreaching and benefits, benefits seems to be a subcategory relationship to overreaching, like a subtopic, right?
yep.
And then how to see that you're overreaching is, I think that's also a subtopic, but it's more specific than benefits. There's a
Yeah,
minor mismatch, but it's not too bad. And
well,
then,
I might have actually communicated that reasonably badly. I think the idea I had with how to see at the time is essentially like, how should one feel about one's own overreaching? And then it's sort of this question of balancing these two, like the benefits and harm. Um, it sounds weird to say balancing them, but in terms of, it's not like the way that I sort of came out of it was, I shouldn't be too upset with myself, because if I was upset with myself, then it would prevent essentially being like honest with myself and being able to actually try and fix foundational issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. That relates to being able to do introspection non-judgmentally, focusing on understanding yourself without rushing to judgment or jumping to conclusions. And try to separate the phases of understanding versus forming an opinion about it versus deciding on what changes you should make versus deciding how to make those changes versus actually accepting the plan and going ahead with action. If you split those things up, it can help, especially with the first phase, which can get really poisoned by bias and beating yourself up and judging before you actually. Judging too early can shut down the information gathering because you already have your answer. Whereas if you're curious to explore more and understand more, and you actually want more information, then it's a lot easier to gather it. And
yeah, I feel
especially
like
if you're open to any conclusion, so then like one half of you isn't on the defense from the beginning.
yeah, I feel like I've been essentially I've fooled myself a little bit in terms of how open I was. And in many ways I really wasn't. Even though it was sort of, there were problems that I was still aware of, that I thought I was handling well, and I didn't realize that I wasn't handling them well. So stuff like, I'd think about the way that people get offended based on something they believe about themselves, and like going back to and reading some of the posts I made in 2018 to FI, sort of made it very clear how much I lacked neutrality at that point, that I wasn't able to actually, like, I at that point I considered myself as someone who was able to sort of not be too affected, but I didn't realize, yeah. In terms of the,
I have some broad comments on bias,
yeah,
like the sort of ability to achieve neutrality. So, static memes and other sort of core parts of our culture cause some biases and some problems of that nature. So, you should expect them by default to be a common problem. It takes substantial problem solving to address it, avoid it, prevent it, etc. And to do that, it is important to have more than your good judgment, more than, well, I tried really hard to be honest, or I tried really hard to be rational, or I think I'm being rational. Anything where you're relying just on your own judgment is giving too much opportunity for the bias to corrupt the evaluation of the bias, and you get stuck.
yep, that's the
So,
suppression of, the criticism.
yeah, it's important to find ways to add objectivity to the process to get things external to yourself involved in it. Other people are one of the things in live discussion that can give you feedback and help reveal some of your biases. Other people in the form of books and videos and stuff can also help because you can check your answers and knowledge and opinions and compare it against theirs, and compare your arguments to theirs and find relevant arguments in their books and so on, and that can also give you extra information. And another source of objectivity is putting your ideas into words. Using language helps us think in a more objective way. You can put them on paper, you can get them outside of yourself, and then you can like review them or analyze them later. And just the very process of putting them into the English language's patterns, because English affects how you think. Like, it gives you guidance on how to put thoughts together and structures your thoughts for you. And so
Mm.
when you use English, your thinking is a bit less freeform, and that takes away a lot of the places bias can sneak in or hide, and it gives you more conscious control and vision over what you're doing. Like, you're aware of more of what you're doing when you're using words.
Yes, yeah. Is there so I don't know if it's jumping ahead a bit. Um, if you have an idea, and so the typical sort of experience I have with ideas is that I'll be thinking about something, and you get this moment where a whole bunch of things click together. Um, and I like my feeling is at that point that's just implicit knowledge. You don't like if there might be explicit components that you inherit from other things, but at that point you've sort of like your brain thinks that it's found something, but it doesn't readily translate into English yet, um, because it's not necessarily made of the same components. And then sometimes when you go through the process of trying to write it down, you realize something that was flawed about it that whatever the internal process of criticism wasn't able to catch. Um,
Yeah.
and often, other times it works out. Um, I guess, yeah. So, well, I guess I was going to say, or going to ask whether there were, like, how do you, um, like, sort of go through that process or expedite it, or be effective at it? But I feel like that's actually just the things that we've just been talking about, as in finding ways to add objectivity is exactly what you do, and words and language and involving other people and other ideas are the way to do it.
Yeah, so another thing is when you have an intuitive grasp of something, like an intuitive opinion, like this is a good idea, I think, and then you do conscious analysis or write it all out, and when you do a more careful process, and then you find a flaw, that is an opportunity to improve your intuition for next time. You can make some sort of adjustment, like try to figure out why your intuition missed it, and over time, if you make a lot of tweaks and corrections, your intuition can get more accurate and reflect more of your conscious knowledge.
Yep, yep. So that's I sort of feel like I've maybe not done it well, but I've definitely done that in the past. Um, the way that I sort of have thought about it is like refusing to let problems stop bothering me without having an idea, without understanding them. Um, uh, like from pure maths problems to like social situations or things, and sort of trying to come up with an explanation for why things happened in certain ways. Um, because without that, yeah, well, yeah, you don't get any opportunity. So even if it was not a particularly good correction of intuition, um, going through that process has always felt valuable, even though it's uncomfortable at the time.
Yeah, and for changing your intuition, you can partly do it by thinking about what changes you want, what you missed, that kind of standard reflection. And that helps some. You can make some change that way. And if you keep doing it over time, you can get a big result. But there are also other methods for changing your intuition. So some of your intuitions, it's a lot easier to do this with than others. But if you can take an intuitive thing and slow it down and take conscious control over it, then you can consciously force some changes on it and practice it that way. And then when you speed up again, you're doing it the new way. So this is easier with physical skills, for example, like typing. You have very
Yep,
strong intuitions about how to type, but you can slow down and consciously overrule them and do it a different way and change your habits.
yep. And this is I feel like speedrunning is often an example here, because that's sort of the extreme of practicing something very particular, um, and you it's very difficult to succeed unless you practice well. for it because it's so precise. Unlike typing, where you can have a very decent. I've seen people like essentially hunt and peck with two hands at 80 words a minute.
Yeah,
But they
so speedrunning is nice because for most games and most kind of situations, you can try doing it slower, and you can break it down step by step, like what buttons have to be pressed in what order. And then you can practice partial sequences. And if you can monitor your gameplay for patterns of errors and then practice whatever you're screwing up slowly until you uh, form a habit of doing it the way you want to do it.
Yeah, is it harder to do with knowledge? It feels like it would be harder to do with knowledge because you sort of burn through ideas, as in you can't explain an idea, um, you can't rediscover an idea. You can't go through the same process with the same idea. Um, but I guess that's the way that you manage that is that you slow down your rate of consuming ideas so that you can get better at processing them, and then you speed up the rate of acquiring new ideas after that, so that you can acquire ideas with a lower error rate as
You can think through an idea even if it's not new to you. You can just go through the process of what problem does this idea solve? How does it solve it? What steps are involved? Whatever else. What's the history of it? What are the rivals? What are the criticisms of the rivals? You
that
can
actually
walk
makes.
through
Oh, yeah.
all of that stuff, even with an old idea, and uh, give it a review or make changes.
So thinking about the sort of steps that or the things under find ways to add objectivity. Um, yeah, the so yeah, I realized my mistake in that it's not actually like the thing that you have to practice is not like coming up with knowledge. It's being able to yeah, like transforming an idea into a collection, a hierarchical collection of ideas, sort of thing in an idea tree. And you can do that with things you already understand, of course, because uh, you're practicing. Like at that point, you're practicing breaking down ideas, not acquiring new ones. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and it's good to start with ideas you already understand so you can focus on practicing the methods, processes, tools, etc. without also being attempting to do something hard intellectually or develop new ideas or something. Focusing on one thing at a time or a small
Um,
number of things usually works better for learning.
so, I mean, one place that this does occur to me that there would be some good resources. The questions about lying and identifying lying from a few years ago. But what occurred to me just now was like with grammar, there's a lot of resources. Like a lot of people have contributed to FI with the same, like doing the same sets of questions, and so there's a good basis for comparison. Um,
Yeah.
you don't need people to actively give you feedback because you can just look through the archive. Um, and I'm wondering whether there's any, or if there's not, whether it's worth sort of trying to pick, or whether I should pick some ideas that are able to be, like, for example, if I was trying to practice idea trees, picking ideas that lots of people could relate to, particularly so that it, yeah, builds up that body.
You could try that. I don't know how quickly you'll be able to get very many people to participate.
Yeah, no, but it's, yeah, I should look through the archive as well for whether people have made idea trees on stuff that I would be able to make them on.
Yeah, I have an archive of the idea trees people have made. I can update that and share it with you later, so you can look through those for examples.
Yeah, that would be good. I sort of it feels like there's not or the examples are a bit scarce at the moment. Um, I'm not sure if it's yeah what I necessarily should be focusing on right now, but it definitely but I was the other night looking through that was when I was going through your very wide idea tree. Um, Yeah, there's I guess just because it's relatively recent in the history of FI.
So we were talking a bit about processes. For example, separating brainstorming from later things, or the process of considering an idea, like what problem does it solve, how does it solve it, what are its rivals, etc. You can see there's like a standardized set of steps you can go through or think about. And those are ways of being more objective because you aren't just using your ad hoc judgment to decide what to do. The process helps guide you. This is very similar to how the scientific method helps scientists, because when it's guiding them instead of them guiding themselves, then their biases don't have the opportunity to control what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. You can't sort of like self-interact with the process of like each individual experiment. When the scientific method, the experiment doesn't affect the method, and so yeah, it's important for us in terms of thinking for the same thing.
Yeah, and then when you turn something into a method and you can write it down as a list of steps or something and write out extra details about how it works, then now that it's outside yourself as a bullet point list or whatever, you can review it, and if you think there are problems with it, you can update it, and you got transparency on all of this, as opposed to when it's all in your head and it's ad hoc and you don't clearly remember what you did last time. It gives bias much more room to adjust things in its favor.
Yeah, no, I've definitely only really done things in an ad hoc manner in the past, where I'll just think about things and an idea will come to me, sort of thing, and sometimes I come up with a reason for why it's wrong. I do definitely like. I feel like this is where my the two sides of my sort of how I feel about myself and things that I've sort of realized and know now. Like one of the things that I say as a I guess a foundational thing is like not choosing the truth is really important. Um, in terms of uh, what you believe about the world or whatever else, which seems sort of trivially true, but following through with it, I haven't ever tried to make my thought process rigorous in such a way that it would actually prevent me from doing that. Um, I sort of just try and convince myself that I do that by spending time, sort of in the thinking state, and then conclude that everything must be okay because I've spent time there. Which is, yeah, only preventing me from actually improving that method.
Yeah, that's really common to not really put much structure or organization to thinking. And the overall big picture effect of this is there are a lot of people who think their thinking is pretty good, and most of them can agree that most of them are wrong.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, it's one of those. I mean, uh, as someone who's believed themselves to be one of those people who, are right when the majority of people are wrong, type thing about that. It's sort of, I don't know. It all feels um, a bit funny now in hindsight. Um, because I, far more comfortable accepting the idea that I don't have ways of actually determining that. And it's essentially come down to ego or something like that, to reassure myself.
Yeah, part of the process stuff has come out of me looking at what other people do, especially public intellectuals and people willing to have discussions, and trying to figure out what goes wrong when I try to talk to them and what are they doing differently than me, and how can I make my processes more explicit and ask people what their objections are to doing some of the same things I do, or suggest it to them, or ask if they have a process that they think is better. I've gotten very, very little feedback, by the way, on anyone suggesting alternative processes. Like, people will say paths forward is too hard, and I will say, well, what do you suggest instead? Do you have a different process that's easier but you think is effective enough? And they never have an answer to that.
Yeah, no, so I feel like I'm in that boat, as in with all those other people. One thing that occurs to me is, like the other night um, when I sort of sat down and I was almost, um, I don't know, not quite like spite or something like that, but um, like I decided to deliberately try and do something that I thought was beyond me, but only a bit, sort of thing. Um, and uh, yeah, trying to do three things at once, even though all of them were relatively straightforward. So like, modifying some software, doing some idea tree stuff, um, and I ended up realizing in sort of this uh, cascade of I don't know, realizing. Um, but yeah, it sort of like became clearer and clearer to me in sort of like an onion-like way. Uh, a lot of it fell away, but it was quite um, uh, uncomfortable is not quite the right word. It was more than like uncomfortable. It was almost like an existential sort of crisis, even though there was no existential threat. Um, I imagine that's how potentially like religious people feel, if they take seriously doubts for the first time type thing. Um,
Right.
anyway, yeah, I feel maybe it's so in terms of like my spending time on this now is um, I mean there's various reasons that I'm like choosing to do this, but it's also really plain to me that if I didn't do it now, there's not really going to be much better periods in the future without like dropping more things, giving up other things that I want to do. And in terms of someone like a public intellectual, or someone who counts themselves as that, um, I mean, they've been doing that for a long time, so they've probably, I'm younger. I've probably, it'll be easier for me, essentially, at least on average. Um, but for them as well, like, I mean, can they take like 2-3 months off work to really try and go through things and fix like foundational mistakes? I feel like that might be why people are so reticent to do any of that, because the cost just seems untenable, and it doesn't seem like they have a problem now. Like their idea of themselves is not one where they have a problem. So why would they do that?
Yeah, a lot of people establish some sort of life, and they have a bunch of commitments and obligations and projects in process and sunk costs and so on. And that makes significant change a lot harder to consider. For public
Mm,
intellectuals specifically, I think they have less of an excuse. I think part of their job description is to actually be asking the big questions and reconsidering things that most people believe and reviewing their own knowledge and making it high quality and so on. Like, I think that's part of what they're supposed to be doing and pretending they are doing.
yeah, yeah. I feel like there's a few analogies to various, um, like not just public intellectuals, but various other public figures, or people out there. Public intellectuals, though, is more of it feels more dishonest because of the particular role that they play
Right, they're
in terms
supposed
of
to
like,
be the expert thinkers who read lots of books and keep track of a variety of knowledge. I mean, sometimes specialized to one field, but still they're supposed to be kind of leading the way on that.
yeah, yep. No, I agree. Um, I sort of find it funny that pretty much every field that I can think of has pretty big camps within it, of different ways of doing things. So whether it's, interpretations of quantum mechanics or the different, how do we what is siblings to what in a parsing tree? Um,
Hmm. Yeah, and different schools of economic thought. Pick
mm.
any major area of history, and there's different schools of thought about how to interpret it, and sometimes even debating some facts.
It's almost like blatantly self-contradictory that they can't uh like the roles that these people perceive themselves in can't be accurate, because if it were, well, I mean, yeah, like you said before, most of them disagree with most of the other ones. Um,
Yeah, they should be better at resolving conflicts among each other, which leads to the implied claim that most of the intellectuals in the other schools of thoughts are frauds. Or, alternatively, you can say ideas are compromises. I score this one a 90 and that one an 85, but I respect my colleagues who are off a few points in their scoring and have the other one higher.
yeah, yep. Um,
And those sorts of attitudes make it really hard to resolve disagreements because you're fudging things and you don't think there are decisive arguments one way or another. So essentially, what they're admitting is their own choice of school of thought is somewhat arbitrary, and they actually think several are about equally good, and they can't really tell the difference.
yeah, yep. And this comes back to the sort of pseudo Bayesianism of weights of evidence and stuff as well.
Yeah,
Which, yeah, I feel like is maybe something that a historian can make a good argument for in ambiguity, but when it comes down to making claims about history and then going further and making claims about reality, it doesn't pan out. Um, Even I'm not sure why I said that. Um, the first part about um,
historians, because they have to operate with incomplete information.
um, with incomplete. Oh yeah, sorry. Yep, not within complete information, but with incomplete information.
Yeah. My general answer to that is given the incomplete information, there is a correct view about what we do and don't know and what sort of conclusions we should reach. And there's an objective truth about that. And we have all the information we need to figure that out. Uh, the question of what we do given this data set and not other information, we're not missing information for how to evaluate that situation.
Yeah, this was something that surprised me about Alan's email the other night. This was actually the thing that sort of like started unraveling the onion. Um, I think it was to do with like the end of it. Or he mentioned I think paths forward was part of it. Um, but yeah, but that's sort of like I think he makes that point several times where I sort of bring up these ideas of like gray areas um, in a sort of contrived sense. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's just that yeah, you just if you can't make the decision, then it's not a question of how do you make it. Um, it's I'm framing a question in a way that doesn't actually have a corresponding um, uh, sort of fragment or not fragment. Like it doesn't correspond to reality. So the answers, like I'm asking a question that doesn't have an answer essentially. Is that anyway? That's what it's sort of my interpretation of it is now.
Yeah, sometimes the objective truth is I don't know, or I don't have enough information to reach a conclusion about that, or something like that. And that is something that people could agree on. You don't have to split into rival camps when there's not enough information. And
Yeah, no, I'd argue that that's actually the dishonest thing to do at that point. Um,
yeah,
it's yeah,
so big picture, everyone's in the same situation, but they're not admitting it regarding overreaching and bias, and so on. Not exactly the same, some are worse than others, but uh, broadly, the situation is they're at the beginning of infinity. They're all alike in their infinite ignorance. There's so many ways they could be better. There's so many systematic errors, failings, and biases in their culture that they take for granted as common sense. Everyone's in that kind of situation, but they don't admit it. Then, when someone gets a glimpse of it and they recognize their situation more, maybe because of a bunch of criticism or something, then that's often hard because they feel like they're worse than everyone else or their life's a disaster or something, which is a very inaccurate perspective. If you get some sort of understanding that you're at the beginning of infinity, if you got some handle on how much you don't know, that puts you ahead of the game. That is a step ahead of most people, and a step closer to Socrates in his humility and recognition that there was a lot of things he didn't know.
Yeah, that's something that it's been like so yeah, I feel like in the last, I don't know, so coming back to FI this time feels very, very different. But I've particularly like realized how little I know about multiple things that I didn't uh I don't know, either didn't want to acknowledge or didn't believe before. Um yeah. Um
People
but I
in
agree with you
general,
that we
go ahead.
Oh, I agree with you about like how we should. So the way that I've put this in terms of just reflecting on myself through like my own development. Um, uh, I was thinking about like the idea of beating yourself up and how should you feel about yourself, and particularly that uh, whatever idea that you take into that needs to be general across whatever position you're at in terms of you could be the best that you've ever been, and you shouldn't have any more or less reason uh, to like be unhappy with yourself if you're making progress. Um, you shouldn't have any reason to be more or less unhappy than if you were in the worst position that you've ever been, but also making progress. Um, it's the important part is like the trajectory, not the position in that regard. And I think, yeah, the it feels daunting because you go through this rapid period of readjusting yourself or the idea that you have in your own head about where you are. Um, but that's in contradiction to the fact that like going through that correction means that you've essentially like had a little bit of acceleration during that period of progress more than you would otherwise. Um, and so yeah, it's sort of, I mean, it's unintuitive that we feel the opposite to how we should. Which actually that occurs to me I mean, um, yeah, so that might be a feature of static memes because it works to suppress um, the the rational view is that we should be happy with progress, um, approximately.
Yeah,
Uh,
and don't shoot the messenger.
yeah. Um, the messenger being the
Someone telling you about errors,
oh yeah, no, definitely.
including if it's
Um,
yourself.
yeah, no, the yeah, not becoming defensive or um, yeah. I think it's sometimes hard to believe people and it feels like an attack when it's not. Um, that's something
Yeah,
I've noticed is people.
there are
Sorry.
reasons for that. People do attack each other a lot, and they deny it a lot. So that makes it a lot harder to believe and trust.
Yeah, it's sort of yeah. I can think about examples in my own life from like less than a month ago where I don't know. I would claim. Oh, it almost sounds like I'm quoting wine and it's sort of phonetically similar, but it's like I would claim that I've never attacked someone or that I didn't attack someone, um, thinking about like various interactions, um, because I didn't call them a name or whatever else. But that's not really the essence of it. I mean, it can be part of attacking someone, but you can attack them without calling them a name either.
Yeah. So part of why people feel bad when they find out about their mistakes or problems is it threatens their place in the social hierarchy. A lot of what people do in their lives is try to climb in some social status ladders or maintain their place that they're content with. And a lot of the way they do that is dishonest. It's posturing. It's pretending to be better than they are because status is related to the perception of other people. So if you can trick them, you can gain status. It doesn't have to be related to reality, so that encourages a lot of dishonesty. Anyways, if you've been living your life this way, which is very, very common for almost everyone to do it to some extent. Like some people more than others. Sometimes they have something that isn't about status, but they'll still do some status things in fairly subtle ways. When you've invested in that, then any kind of admission of weakness threatens that big investment and can result in a lot of social punishments as people start looking down on you and saying, ah, ha, ha, you have a weakness, like you're worse than us, like I get to leapfrog ahead of you in the ladder. And you can admit to a problem that they all have, and they'll all lie that they don't have it so that they can be above you. They think, one of the standard things people think is, if you show weakness or if you admit to a problem, that means the problem is really, really, really bad. Because if it was only like a mildly bad problem, you would still be hiding it. The only reason you're showing it is it was so bad that you had no choice. So it's like a complete and utter disaster, or you'd be hiding it from them. That's a lot of people's default reactions. And so that kind of social context makes rationality a lot harder. It pushes dishonesty on people. It traps them in dealing with other people's perceptions.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it sort of, I mean, it feels like it's almost blatantly, self-evidently wrong when you put it as plainly as that. As in, if someone claims that the only reason you would show a mistake is because it's impossible, or like a problem because it's impossible to hide it, it entirely denies error correction, like voluntary error correction. So it's obviously anti-progress. But obviously in social context, that's not how it plays out a lot of the time.
Yeah. This stuff is well known in some senses. Like, people know that most people put their best foot forward on Facebook and show vacation pictures that look nice, and that time they went to a fancy restaurant ends up on Facebook, and stuff is cherry picked and it's not a representative sample of their life. And they're all trying to make their life look better than it is. And they know they're doing that, and they know other people are doing it, and they don't know how to get out of that game, even if they want to.
I feel like it's only like the cost of getting out as such only increases. I mean, unless you come by some other problem, like if you, I don't know, gambled all your money away or something like that, then your status or social stuff is gonna have consequences there anyway. So you might get lucky in that it's easier to make a change then, but that's sort of the only way to get out of it, which is not nice anyway. You don't want to have to go through necessary harm as opposed to choosing where you can actually do it in a far more rational and responsible manner.
Yeah, social stuff, I think, is really fundamental to what's going on in the world, and it's complicated and it's subtle and it's hard to learn, And I think it's despite its importance, I think it's a bad place to start because it's too difficult, and it's better to do, say, idea trees, which are more approachable and more logical and easier to deal with objectively. Whereas social is more like having to do advanced philosophical analysis in order to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think it was no, this wasn't it. There was a one of your posts was on the opening few minutes of How to Train Your Dragon 2, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It has Puppet Master in the title, I believe.
Yep, that sounds familiar.
Or at least Puppet.
Yeah, pulling your strings, that's yeah. So I remember, so when I mean, I dropped off after a few replies. I can't remember where. There we go. I didn't
Yeah,
stick around long enough to finish, but I remember talking to some people about this, and it was very difficult to convince them that there were any problems in this.
in the
You
movie.
like there were well, no, even just in those few minutes, as in they would say, you know, like, oh yeah, these things aren't good, but as in there were a lot of uh, I'm not sure
Okay,
anyone goes into that
so they
without
admit it
having
wasn't
excuses
perfect,
prepared.
they just didn't think it was very important and wasn't
Yeah,
like
that was
representative of society.
it's not worth worrying about because basically the way that the analogy I'd use is like everyone is doing the error correction on behalf of the filmmakers and they give it like that's the excuse is that oh we can see how it could be better or whatever else so we're not going to criticize it or claim that it's not good. Um,
Yeah, that's not very realistic. If everyone knows better, then the writers would know better and the film would be different. There's no reason to fight with your audience. Like, they're trying to make it in a way that most of their viewers will prefer and agree with and so on.
so this is yeah I feel like uh I mean I don't know it seems to me maybe there's a sort of an equilibrium position where people are um if you push them, they might admit something, but they're quite happy ignoring it the rest of the time because of other like reasons or perceived benefits or um as in they don't believe that uh almost like even the like there's another layer of indirection on the belief that it's not important. Don't feel like I'm explaining that well. Um like as in oh there's some good things about this, or I agree with the gist of what this person is trying to say, so I'll, you know, share their content or whatever else. And even though there's big problems with other parts of it, um, yeah, people still share it and they still defend it, and they defend their sharing of it, even though they might admit that it wasn't that good under pressure. Um, I've sort of in some of my when I was so when I uh, so when I said I feel like I'm quoting wine, and I meant in terms of like being the woman in this thing, um, in this quote, um,
Hmm.
which is yeah, sort of the first time I felt that, which is sort of interesting. Um, anyway, yeah, it's the times where I'm thinking about that are the times where I've tried to push people as well to admit that something wasn't as good as they're claiming it was, which is maybe an interesting contradiction in myself in that I would claim that I'm doing it for the right reasons, but it's also the times where if I wasn't attacking them, that I came closest to attacking them, and probably just did anyway. Anyway, I'm not quite sure how to think about that or feel about it yet.
Part of it is normal social contexts are not an appropriate place for rational discussion. They sometimes they'll claim they are, but they aren't really. It's not expected. It doesn't fit in. It's important to try to do that with people who want it. Not be pushy with it with people who are just there. It's important to some extent to let people come to you or seek out specialized groups that are into that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I haven't like. There was a time definitely when I was younger where I would do that sort of thing at like just purely social situations. Um, but I feel like recently it's there's already an expectation of, or at least, well, I guess there's maybe a difference between like the reality and the perspective in that there's definitely like communities I've either been a part of or like in chat rooms or things like that where there's the belief that well, it's just what you were describing actually, that the belief that they're rational, but they're not actually welcoming of it. Anyway, yeah. Um, but that's particularly what I'm thinking about with the few occasions like within recent history that I was describing. They were at least somewhat specialized.
Yeah, a lot
But
of the rationality communities, like Less Wrong, have limits on what ideas they're open to and stuff. But they also have thicker skins and they're better at dealing with being argued with and criticized and stuff. And
mm,
so to a partial extent it works better.
yeah.
Okay, so another thing, partly related to overreaching and the general world situation, is people underestimate, well, in general, the complexity of the human condition, but specifically the complexity of rational thinking and philosophy. They approach it kind of like a hobby where they can read a few books and articles and think they agreed with them, and then think now they've learned it and they can do it. They're not treating it like a profession or a specialization or expertise. In a lot of ways, they treat it like learning philosophy is easier than learning to drive. They don't do the same sort of organized practice that driving gets. And
Mm,
when people start learning to drive, they go to an empty parking lot. They start really small and make it really easy on themselves, and then they ramp up the complexity one step at a time from there. But when people want to learn philosophy, what they mostly do is they read high level articles about uh, sophisticated conclusions and ideas and stuff. And they like
mm.
to play with those and talk about these fancy ideas, but it's not what you would do if you thought philosophy was 100 times harder than learning to drive, that you needed to start at the beginning and ramp up.
Is the so I mean thinking well, I mean the only mind I know is my own. Um, so BOI seems like the essentially well, it's probably the most complex thing I've ever read. Um, which is why it's like why I've made, various claims about it in the past. Um, is the only way to fix that to go back to the empty parking lot? Um, I mean, it feels uh, like
I
one of
think
the sorry, go on.
I think basically that's the most effective way, is to start there, and then because you skipped ahead, you'll have some of the skills. You're not going to have to relearn everything. So sometimes you'll get to something and be like, oh yeah, I remember this. I already learned it, and it'll actually work. But like filling in the gaps is really important.
Yeah, and the only way you can do that is to go over the terrain again. Um, I guess the fear is um, so like one of the bad things about university is the way that you can't skip ahead. Like you can't just take a whole bunch of exams for courses, and if you pass them, then you just get credit for them. Um, there's like
Hmm.
everyone is forced to take the long way. Um, that's not like here, of course, because um, yeah, I mean, in many ways it's more self-directed, but it's also um, has more principles, or at least sticks to them better. Um, yeah, so we shouldn't be scared about trying to do that because if we are as good as we think we are, then we'll really quickly go through the parking lot and whatever else anyway. because any test that gets thrown at us will already know how to pass. But as soon as we can't pass,
if you put a race car driver in that parking lot, he's very quickly going to demonstrate competence and skill with all the different things and work his way up. It won't take very long. It won't be a problem.
yeah, doesn't matter how complex the nose cones are, he'll still ace it. And yeah, so that's how we validate then. So that like when I was talking earlier about not knowing how to validate this sort of thing, like that is how we validate it, is being able to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the ways.
Yeah. So given that it's passing 2 o'clock, I
Yeah,
feel like maybe I should briefly talk about what I plan to do, because I want to finish this grammar stuff. I think if I can get to the third, like, always part 3, where do we actually get up to? How far? I mean, part 2 actually isn't that long. Is it that long?
we did some of part 3. We went pretty quickly. We didn't really cover everything in depth.
Yeah, I think we
I was
skipped a
trying to
bunch
hit key points.
Yep. Part 3 looks like it's actually not that. Yeah, part 3 is pretty like is verbals and then implied references and down to conclusion. So, okay, I'm gonna try and
The references and then the implied words aren't all that hard compared to some of the other stuff. So yeah, I was gonna suggest that you work on the grammar some more, and also one other thing, write down what you think overreaching is and how it works and some overview. And that'll give us something to talk about.
Yep. I have been like what do you call it? So I haven't actually updated this in the last day and a half or so, but starting to like write down sort of various sort of, I mean, some of them are much smaller, but little fragments of ideas and stuff as I start to think of them. So I'll yeah, okay. I've got to develop. I'll do that particularly. That's a good thing to focus on.
Okay, and if you have trouble with it or you prefer, just do a bullet point list, and that would be fine too.
Yep. That's actually probably a good idea because in part of the reason I'm trying to do this is to get better at writing, and bullet points are well, I might do bullet points and an idea tree. That feels like a good mix. Maybe doing both at once is overreaching though. I'll start with the bullet points. Grammar and bullet points. That's good. Cool. All right.
All right, bye.
See you.